The Trump administration announced plans this past week to eliminate a scientific finding called the endangerment finding that enables the government to fight climate change. What does that mean for our desert state? We're joined now by Congresswoman Yassamin Ansari. She is a climate policy expert. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thank you for having me.
I do want to start with politics because you're having a lot of town halls during this recess period. You have a couple this weekend. What's the vibe among Democratic voters? What do they want to talk about? Is it Medicaid? Is it climate? Is it Jeffrey Epstein?
Great question. Every community is a little bit different. We have 4 town halls this week across the state. First one was in Congressional District 1, David Schweikert's district. I would say there's a big emphasis on healthcare. We had a couple of physicians from the community come speak about what the impacts to the Medicaid cuts would be. Obviously also concerns around the rising deficit. You know, their Congressman David Schweikert is somebody who has railed against the rising deficit on the House floor for years and just voted for a $3.5 trillion increase in our deficit. In Flagstaff on Tuesday night, we actually heard a lot about climate change and the impacts of air pollution, the impacts of rolling back the clean energy tax credits in Trump's budget bill. And then this weekend we'll be in Tucson and Sunday back in Phoenix. So I think, largely speaking, when you're talking about a bill that represents the most unprecedented transfer of wealth from the working class and poor people in this country to billionaires, I think that will have impacts across the board for everybody.
All right. Well, today we're talking about climate. Do an explainer for us. What is the endangerment finding and what kind of regulation has it produced over the last several years?
So the endangerment finding is actually from the year 2009, so quite a long time ago now, and it is a rule that helps regulate greenhouse gas emissions, especially from polluters and especially car manufacturers in this country. It is based on science, based on the fact that we need to be regulating our greenhouse gas emissions in line with what climate science demands, and has been a very useful tool for us over more than a decade. Now, what the new EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has proposed is completely scrapping that. It's a massive giveaway to oil and gas companies in this country that are vehemently against any sort of progress when it comes to climate change. That's why they spent $1 billion to get Donald Trump elected, and they are seeing the profits of that now. It's not final yet. There's a public hearing process in August, but this administration across the board has been so anti-science, so anti-fact, so anti-progress that I have no doubt that they're going to do everything that they can to roll back this rule as well, just like they've rolled back all of the clean energy tax credits, all of the progress made through the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And you asked about Arizona. The impacts here will be significant. Arizona's on the front lines. We have extreme heat. We have some of the worst air pollution in the entire country. We rank 5th nationwide here in Phoenix.
And so what could, and before I get to this, there could be lawsuits as well, couldn't there, that would hold this up?
Of course, and there will be.
There seems to be with almost every Trump action. So are there things that the city of Phoenix, where you were former vice mayor, or the state could do on their own about these environmental issues?
Absolutely, and when you're dealing with an administration like Trump's, it is very important to have strong local, state, county action on so many issues. That's what we saw during the first Trump administration. At the local level here in Phoenix, I led a lot of the work on our transportation electrification. We now have our first electric buses because of the plan that I had led a couple of years ago. I hope the city continues. I know they will do everything that they can to continue with that. That's also tough because federal funding is much more limited now on these issues, where before we benefited from federal funding. But the city also has done a lot when it comes to our heat mitigation efforts. I got to visit one of the 24/7 cooling centers a couple of weeks ago that's literally saving lives. At the state level, absolutely more can be done, when it comes to regulation on these issues. And, I think when it comes to water security, as an example of one of the climate impacts, our governor has done a great job when it comes to proposing policies that are sometimes tough with the business community because, generally folks don't want to see regulation, but we have real problems in the state and in this country, and sometimes regulation is the way to deal with them.
Is there something you could think of you might do if you were still on, or propose if you were still on the Phoenix City Council?
I think just making sure that we are continuing on the electrification front. And the reason for that is that here in Phoenix, transportation is more than 50% of the reason for our horrific air pollution. We're obviously a very car-centric city. just making the investments we need in public transportation. So what I would do is make sure that, when it comes to light rail, we just opened in South Phoenix. We need to make sure the West Phoenix light rail moves forward. Bus rapid transit is in the works in Phoenix. That is going to be a great, accelerating that to the extent possible so people have more ways to get around. And then continuing to expand our charging infrastructure and work with great local companies like Lucid, who are at the forefront of EV manufacturing, creating jobs in the state. And I want to point that out as well, because in the Trump budget bill, one of the most compelling calls I received from a local constituent was a conservative labor leader who just was so baffled by how any Republican in Arizona could vote for a bill that's going to kill more than 27,000 manufacturing jobs. We are at the forefront of clean energy here, and the job loss that we're going to see because of what's in this bill is going to be really impactful.
All right, let's pivot to your recent visit to ICE's Eloy Detention Center. You were there to visit sick detainees. You've made that a mission of yours ever since the beginning of the year. Why were you turned away?
So I visited the first time on May 29th, unscheduled, let's say, because that is, allowed by the law. So I went and I had a 3-hour tour at Eloy, and I was able to speak with more than a dozen women who confided in me about the horrific conditions that they face, and I'm happy to talk about that. Then since then, we have been receiving direct calls from either the detainees themselves or from family members and lawyers about the lack of medical attention that some of them are receiving. There's a woman there who has leukemia. She's lost 55 pounds. There's another constituent of mine who's been coughing up blood, and another one with a kidney infection. So we decided we wanted to go back specifically to visit these individuals and check on their well-being. We followed every protocol, including providing 7 days notice, which, by the way, is a new suggestion that they have, which has never been the case and is against the law. We also got privacy release forms for those individuals so that we could meet with them. By Friday morning, the night before I was supposed to visit in mid-June, we were approved to visit one of the individuals. So we said, okay, we will do that. Then later that evening, we got another email that said, actually, you cannot visit any of these people. You can come back and have another tour just like you had a couple of weeks ago, but you cannot visit those specific individuals. And my district director, who came with me the first time, responded to understand why that is, if they could point to any sort of policy, and we never got a response.
And to be clear, do members of Congress have a right to visit with detainees, like beyond just touring a facility, a right to visit with specific detainees?
We are supposed to. We always have. It's in the law that we are supposed to do that. Of course, there's these forms and such. They want to make sure, but we followed all of those protocols.
And so there have been lawsuits filed.
Yes.
To open the doors. What's the status of those?
It was just filed because there have been, about a dozen members of Congress in different states who were outright denied, never were allowed into the door when they showed up. And so they have filed a lawsuit because, of course, this is against the law, and they have a right to go see their constituents and provide oversight. The administration actually scrapped 3 of the independent oversight bodies that used to exist at these for detainees to be able to provide their feedback and provide issues that they're seeing. Those have been scrapped. So members of Congress visiting these facilities are pretty much the only way we can conduct oversight.
And so do you plan to keep showing up?
Absolutely. This is a massive issue in Arizona. My district, nationwide, 1 in 10 people know somebody who has been detained or deported by this administration. In my district, that number is much higher, and I'm telling you that the conditions are horrific. I would not, it is a prison. Many have described it as a concentration camp. People are being dehumanized and abused in these places.
Got to end it there. Congresswoman Yassamin Ansari, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.